Welcome to SASH Club Online. I'm Ariella, and we're so glad you're here. While we wait for folks to join, drop an intro in the chat, share a little bit about yourself and the topics you'd love to cover in our meetings, and what you hope our club can do together. Just a quick reminder, please don't share details about sexual harassment or assault. And if you want to talk about those topics, you can share like it happened to someone you know or speak in general terms. If you haven't filled out our member form yet, the link is in the chat. So here's the plan. We're going to start with a short presentation. You can comment or ask questions in the chat anytime. And after that, we'll stop the recording, respond to your questions, and open it up for discussion. And you'll have the option of turning on your camera and microphone. At the end, we'll share a super quick survey. Please fill it out before you leave the meeting. And if you come to 3 meetings and fill out the surveys, you'll get a certificate of achievement. Thank you again for joining us and being a part of the SASH Club community.
Thank you so much, Ariella, for getting us started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Megan Golanka. I am a parent of young adults and adolescents. I volunteer to help out with our SASH Club at the local high school that my kids started at their high school. And I'm also a developmental psychologist with an interest in creating safe and equitable spaces for youth. And today, my daughter Rose and I will be helping to facilitate this meeting. And I will go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rose. I'm a sophomore in high school, and my brother and sister started our school SASH Club that I'm the secretary of. And I'm also a youth intern for the National SASH organization. I'm really glad everybody showed up to give their support, and I'm just really happy to be here.
Great. So to get us started for our meeting today, before we start the presentation, let's do a quick warm-up question. Do you all feel like students and young people today know enough about their rights and protections when it comes to sexual misconduct? So go ahead and put in your choices and we'll take a look at the poll. And while you're doing that, I'm going to open up the presentation and share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share these results with you and show you that it looks like everyone's in agreement that people don't know quite enough about their rights and protections when it comes to sexual misconduct. So it's a good thing that we are going to be talking about that today. Okay. Okay. So we'll go ahead and just jump right into our presentation. If you want to refer to this presentation later, you can find it on the SASH Club resources page online. We'll put the link for that in the chat. And as we mentioned, this power topic is about sexual misconduct by school employees. It's a really important subject because schools are meant to be safe spaces, and sometimes the adults in position and authority abuse that trust. And the same goes for other environments with other relationships that have power imbalances. So that could be like in the workplace, in sports, or in theater, or other community or extracurricular activities, as well as like in colleges with professors or advisors, or even in romantic relationships with older partners. So I just want to give a brief heads up before we begin that this presentation, as you might expect, will cover sexual misconduct by school employees. And this kind of material might be a little bit upsetting for some. So please just do what you need to do to take care of yourself. That could be stepping away for a minute or just listening in whatever way feels comfortable for you. So here's where we're going today. We'll take a look at what school employees' sexual misconduct is, how often it happens, and how grooming works. We'll also talk about the impact on students and what we can do in response. And while we'll focus on schools, we'll also broaden the conversation to other relationships where power imbalances can create similar risks. So the presentation will focus specifically on schools, but especially in the discussion, we can open that up. So this next slide gives us some key terms and concepts that we'll be using today. When we talk about a perpetrator, we mean the person who harasses or assaults a victim. Sexual misconduct includes a wide range of behaviors. physical, verbal, or even visual, that are sexual in nature and unwanted. Perpetrators often use grooming techniques to build trust with the student, making them less likely to recognize the behavior as abuse. They also tend to target students they see as more vulnerable. And once abuse happens, perpetrators may use different forms of control, things like threats, secrecy, or emotional pressure to keep a student from telling anyone. So we'll break some of these down more in the next sections, but I just wanted us to start getting familiar with this language because it'll help us make sense of some of the patterns we see. So let's look a little more closely at what school employee sexual misconduct can look like. It's not just one thing. It can be physical, like full body hugs, inappropriate touching, having a student sit on a lap, and then all the way to sexual contact. But it can also be verbal or visual. Sometimes it's things like inappropriate comments about a student's body, over the top compliments that feel like they cross boundaries, or even digital behavior like sending texts or messages on social media that turn personal or sexual. At the extreme end, this can include things like sending nude images or pornography. The key point is that sexual misconduct isn't just extreme or obvious actions. It can include any unwanted behavior that makes a student feel comfortable, whether it's physical, verbal, digital, anything that crosses that professional boundary and causes discomfort. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the students who perpetrators often target. These are students who might be more vulnerable for different reasons. Maybe they have physical or cognitive disabilities, struggles in school, or challenges at home. They might feel isolated from their peers or have substance use problems, or face immigration concerns. So, perpetrators often pick students like this because they're less likely to report abuse, or if they do, they may be less likely to be believed. And understanding who might be targeted helps us see patterns and recognize why it's so important to listen to all students and to take every concern seriously. Let's talk about how perpetrators manipulate students to gain trust and control. Grooming often starts really subtly. A perpetrator may build a special relationship with a student and even their parents, offer one on one tutoring or mentorship, or give extra attention, praise, or gifts. They may also start talking about romantic or sexual topics, normalize sexual contact, or even suggest using drugs or alcohol. All these actions are ways to manipulate a student and isolate them, and that makes it harder for them to recognize that abuse is happening or to feel safe speaking up about it. So, the really important thing here is that grooming is about control. It's not really about a genuine relationship or care. So, that brings us into talking about control. Let's talk a little bit about how perpetrators maintain control and keep students from speaking up. They often manipulate the students' emotions, making them feel affection or loyalty toward the perpetrator, which can be really confusing. They also exploit the power imbalance, intimidating the student into thinking no one will believe them if they do report it. And sometimes they might threaten a student's opportunities with this power imbalance they have. So things like threatening your grades, playing time in sports, or a role in a theater performance or something like that. They may threaten to tell about something they know that's private about the student or about something the student did wrong. And in extreme cases, they might even threaten harm to the student's family or their pets. So all of these tactics are about control. They're meant to isolate the student and make reporting really feel impossible for them. So now that we've talked about who perpetrators target and how they groom and control students, it's important to understand sort of the scope of this issue. So what we have here is according to research about this issue, and we see that unfortunately, sexual misconduct by school employees isn't that rare. Research shows about 17% of students say that they've experienced some form of inappropriate behavior from a school employee. And arrest data also highlight the seriousness of the problem. 199 public educators in the US were arrested for sex related crimes against students in just the first 9 months of 2022. And again, these are the ones who were like reported and it went all the way to arrest. It's probably Unfortunately, more students than that experience it and haven't reported. It's also important to recognize that this abuse doesn't affect all students equally. So, Latino, Black, and Indigenous students are disproportionately impacted. And so, understanding how widespread the problem is helps us to see why it's so important for us to engage in prevention awareness and why reporting systems are so critical. And these headlines show that sexual misconduct by school employees isn't just a statistic, it's happening in real schools, it's affecting real students. Seeing it reported in the news can be sort of shocking, but it also highlights why it's so important to recognize warning signs and understand grooming and control tactics, and to create, and importantly, to create safe ways for students to report. So these cases are sort of extreme examples, but the underlying behaviors like abuse of trust, targeting vulnerable students, exploiting power, they can appear in a lot of ways, like we just talked about, from subtle boundary violations to some really serious criminal behavior. And our goal today is sort of understanding these patterns so that we can prevent abuse and support students effectively. So, staying along the research track, let's look at a little bit of data to better understand some of these patterns in school employee sexual misconduct. So, we'll see some statistics here about who the perpetrators are by gender and role, and also who the targets tend to be. We'll also look at which types of abuse are most common. So the goal of these slides isn't to overwhelm you with numbers and graphs. It's just to help us recognize some of the trends, understand the risks, and then also identify areas where prevention and intervention are most needed. And we can talk about that during our discussion. As we go through these, just think about how these patterns relate to what we discussed earlier, like grooming, control, and targeting vulnerable students. So here we can see that targets of sexual misconduct are majority female identifying students, but over a quarter of students reporting being harassed were male students. So that really shows that it does not just happen to females. School employees who engage in sexual misconduct are primarily male. But again, as the headlines and the statistics show, female school employees can also be perpetrators. And the highest percentage of school employees who engaged in sexual misconduct were substitute teachers or a teacher, and followed by coaches and trainers or other school employees. Verbal harassment and inappropriate touching are the most common forms of harassment reported by school employees, followed by sexual contact, sexual messages and images, and spying. So how and where is it happening? This slide helps us understand that abuse can happen in many ways and in many different by many different people in many different settings. So regardless of gender, anyone can be an abuser or a victim. Um, with this slide, it also reminds us that misconduct doesn't just happen in classrooms. That is one place where it can happen, but it can also occur during after school activities, before, during, or after sporting events, on field trips, on school transportation, or even at an employee's home. So basically, wherever students interact with adults in positions of power, there is a potential risk. So knowing that there's this range of circumstances and locations, it helps us think a little more broadly about prevention and supervision and why it's important for policies to cover things not just that happen like in the classroom or in the school, but any type of place where students and adults in power are together. Okay, so next we're going to go over some scenarios, and as we go, Rose is going to take us through them. And we'll ask you to share some of your thoughts either in the chat or in the discussion afterwards. Rose, do you want to go ahead?
Yep. And as we go over these, please look out for the types of abuse and what makes a student more vulnerable, and we can put our answers in the chat. Scenario 1. A new student, Alex, is attending high school. He tries out for the baseball team and attends practices a few times per week. After one practice, his coach calls him into the office to talk about performance goals one-on-one. The coach makes casual jokes and Alex laughs along. The meetings in the office become regular, and sometimes the coach makes inappropriate jokes. Alex has heard this described as locker room talk and goes along with it even though he feels uncomfortable. The situation escalates. The coach compliments Alex and eventually starts touching him. Alex doesn't know how to get help. The coach reassures him that this is a normal relationship when a player is special like he is. Alex is afraid that if he tells someone, the coach will have him removed from the team and he could lose scholarship opportunities. The abuse becomes more frequent and Alex feels trapped. Just again, remember these questions and we can go over them during the discussion later. Scenario 2. Cooper is a talented and bright 6th grade student with a mild developmental disability. When his father figure uncle died in the beginning of middle school, Cooper became noticeably withdrawn. His male math teacher noticed this and offered Cooper extra tutoring at lunchtime. They met in a classroom in a remote part of campus that was scheduled for remodeling. Soon, the teacher began showing Cooper pornography and took him into an isolated bathroom where he repeatedly raped him over 2 years, threatening to kill Cooper if he told anyone. The teacher convinced Cooper that his mother approved of their relationship and that he would be keeping a watch on Cooper from his nearby home. Cooper's emotional health worsened, but he didn't disclose the abuse for several years. Just another look at these questions.
So that seems like a good place to pause for a minute. We ended on the fact that Cooper had emotional difficulties for years afterwards. So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways these types of actions by school employees affect students. So first, there's academic consequences. Students might avoid certain teachers or even school altogether. They may have trouble concentrating, leading to lower grades. There are also emotional consequences like fear, shame, self doubt, sometimes depression, anxiety, and these feelings can be overwhelming and long lasting. And finally, there are long term effects that may follow into adulthood, like substance use, mistrust of institutions, and difficulty forming close or intimate relationships. The important thing to remember is that the impact of abuse goes far beyond the immediate situation, and it can affect a students' learning, well being, and their trust for years to come. Okay, so let's look at a couple more scenarios with Rose before we move on.
All right, these are our last two scenarios. Scenario 3. Anne is a high school biology teacher in a small town. Her student Brian is a tall 16-year-old who plays on the basketball team. He doesn't socialize with his teammates and is considered a loner. Anne emailed Brian, offering to assist him with his homework after school, first in her classroom and later at her home. Anne started asking Brian about whether he had ever made out with girls, requesting him to describe the details. She befriended Brian's parents, who allowed him to take an overnight trip with her to a state science fair. They had sex on that trip and continued having sexual relations in hotels and in her car and classroom during her free period. He experienced depression for many years as a result of this relationship. Scenario 4. At orchestra rehearsals, Mr. Jones often compliments Sam and her friends, making her feel comfortable and valued. He also makes sexual jokes and comments. Sam brushes them off because she trusts her teacher. She sees one of her friends, Jenna, occasionally alone with the teacher after rehearsals. Sam notices that Jenna starts to get rides home from Mr. Jones. Jenna has been having a rough time at home and feels that rehearsal is a place where she is appreciated. Sam is worried that her friend could be in an inappropriate relationship with the teacher, but when she asks about it, Jenna quickly shuts down the conversation. After learning about grooming behaviors, Sam starts to worry. Sam lets Jenna know about confidential support resources at the local crisis center. Sam explains that counselors there are not required to disclose information to parents, the police, or child protective officials. Later, Jenna tells Sam that she's glad that Sam intervened. Sam and Jenna stay friends, and Sam continues supporting Jenna.
Thanks, Rose. So these are some scenarios, and these are also some questions that we can talk about when we conclude the presentation and move on to discussion. Those are just a few different examples of ways that we see sexual misconduct by school employees. And again, our discussion after the presentation can expand to talk about other types of power imbalance relationships outside of school as well. So we're going to be wrapping up the presentation soon. A couple of things I want to walk you through. If you'd like to learn how to report harassment by school employees and others in positions of power, you can stay for the discussion. We'll talk more about that. You may also want to explore our power topic limits to confidentiality while reporting sexual harassment. And we're going to drop that link in the chat, or you can also find it by going to our website at sashclub.org. I'd like to point out these resources, which are also available on our website and in the PDF of this presentation, which we can also drop the link to that in the chat so you can follow and get these slides that we went over today so that you can look over them on your own and follow up on some of these resources if you're interested in that. We also have important resources on what to do if you or someone you care about is sexually assaulted or harassed. We have a couple slides on that, just so you know that those are here for you if you want to check this out as a resource. We also have a bunch of different ways that you can follow us to share your feedback, suggestions, contact us via any of these ways. We'll drop them in the chat as well. And you can browse more power topics, more presentations like this one about a number of different topics on the sashclub.org website. And we just would also like to thank those who contributed to the creation of this presentation. And this concludes our presentation. Please stay for the discussion. And I will turn it over to Ariella just to have a little closing message before we go and we'll stop the recording in a minute too.
Thanks for the great presentation. You can find out how to start a SASH Club at your school on the SASH Club Start a Club webpage, and invite your friends to join our online club, and I hope to see you next time.